If you've been in the XJW community, you've probably seen this video.
Nice to just test them out, taste them.
Yeah.
This clip was sent to Lloyd Evans, who proceeded to make a video that has gathered 250,000 views already, where he shows his intellectual prowess by giving us a deep analysis of the footage.
Here is a guy who can get caught out wandering around a booze store at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, which is when this was recorded. The bare minimum I think you can ask is, well, first of all, that's an odd activity for a governing body member on a Sunday morning. He's definitely unworthy of the adoration and veneration that he goes out looking for. It's inevitable, given the amount of video material they're pumping out, it's inevitable that these men are going to get a kind of celebrity status. So it was inevitable that this exact thing was going to happen at some point, and you can be sure it's going to happen again. Maybe not with him, but maybe with another governing body member.
While Lloyd did say we shouldn't speculate,
I think it's important to say at this point that we don't know why he was buying the whiskey.
After that video, he realized he actually did want to speculate. So he took this to assume Tony Morris is an alcoholic and decided to make fun of him for it on a regular basis.
I want to emphasize here for you, when something hits you, because maybe you've had wrong thinking, sobering, yet something we look forward to.
It's difficult to make sense of what he's saying because he's slurring so badly. More than likely, if you ask me, because there was some whiskey in his cornflakes.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yes, Tony, it's very sobering. And I guess you would know, out of arguably all of the governing body members, well, I think I know what every cell in Tony's body was absorbed in when he was giving this ridiculous sermon. Have to be hammered. Presumably coaxed to the podium with promises of a whiskey popsicle is governing body member Anthony Morris III.
And this behavior has kind of taken over the XJW community, where we think it's fine to assume Tony is an alcoholic and should be made fun of for it. In fact, the narrative of Tony Morris being an alcoholic is a given in the community. And it's so prevalent that a ton of people agreed that it was a good potential explanation for Tony Morris no longer being a part of the governing body.
I think, honestly, maybe he genuinely had a drinking problem. And it had gone on long enough. And people knew about it.
It's long been an open secret that Tony is prone to drinking alcohol.
Don't know why he was buying the whiskey.
But is that what the clip shows us? What's the proof behind these allegations? Let's actually study the clip instead of rushing to make a video on it in a day.
All we know for sure is that at around 11 a.m. yesterday on Sunday,
the clip shows a man who's clearly Tony Morris minding his own business and buying some alcohol bottles. When he's approached by a stranger who's secretly filming him, he's nice and establishes a bit of conversation with him, even suggesting him an affordable scotch that his wife likes.
You're a fan of scotch. Do you know anything about Irish whiskey?
Yeah. Not a lot. My wife likes it.
Yeah.
Jameson's always.
Yeah.
He comes off as someone who's gregarious and who knows about whiskey. In fact, I'd go as far as to say this is the most likable we've ever seen my grandpa. He's seen buying a dozen bottles of Macallan Scotch, loading them into what looks like a Cadillac Sedan Seville from 25 years ago, and leaving. What can we conclude about this? Well, so far, we can conclude that Tony Morris knows about Scotch, is surprisingly approachable, and was buying a large and expensive amount of alcohol at a time when most Jehovah's Witnesses are out preaching. And we can find several things to criticize. We know that most Bethelites will never have this kind of money to just buy alcohol. And we know that in some areas, being seen as buying this much alcohol can definitely raise some eyebrows among the congregation, and maybe even more. We can even argue that since this would be inappropriate behavior for other Jehovah's Witnesses who follow what Tony has to say, then it was inappropriate behavior for Tony too. This clip shows us the hypocrisy of the Jehovah's Witness structure, where the rank and file have to follow strict rules, but those rules become more and more flexible as you climb up the ranks. And all of that is fine and valid, but we haven't proved he's an alcoholic yet. Obviously, we can't say Tony Morris is an alcoholic just because he bought a bunch of alcohol once. We've all bought a whole bunch of alcohol at some point, although maybe not this expensive. And since we only have the one example of Tony doing this, we can't assume he buys this amount of alcohol regularly. So we can't assume he's an alcoholic.
That we don't know why he was buying the whiskey.
What we need to do is establish a pattern of behavior. And now that we're looking out for signs of him being an alcoholic, for the very first time ever, we notice how he slurs his speech.
It affects God's people as well. You see the pandemic causing people, according to some reports, filled with it. So the subject we're going to have this morning a discussion about.
So, case closed, right? He bought a whole bunch of alcohol once, and his speech is kind of slurry. Alcoholic confirmed. Except we can't conclude that yet. One of the most common causes for slurred speech is dysarthria, when the muscles needed for speech become weak, making speech harder. And there's no clear cause for this condition. You can get it due to Parkinson's, sclerosis, or as a result of a head injury or a stroke or a billion other things. In fact, it's so common, he's not even the only one in the governing body who constantly slurs his speech.
Truth is compared to a way on which we walk. 2 Peter 2:2 speaks of the way of the truth.
At Acts 17:27, Paul told some in Athens, "He is not far off from each one of us."
If we wanted to speculate, we can just as easily arrive at the conclusion that Tony's slurred speech, combined with his weight issue and his age, proves he had a stroke because, well, it technically checks all boxes. And there's nothing inherently wrong with speculation. After all, it's inevitable to wonder how the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses live, especially when we catch glimpses of their private lives. The problem comes when we confuse our speculation and biases with facts. After all, when we were Jehovah's Witnesses, we didn't believe the doctrine because we proved it to ourselves. We believed it because we trusted that other people had proved it already. We woke up when we tried to conclusively prove the doctrine to ourselves, but couldn't. And the more I try to prove conclusively that Tony is an alcoholic, the less proof I can find. All I can find are just clips of an old man with slurred speech that once got some expensive alcohol bottles. But there's something more damaging at hand. Let's say for a second that my theory of Tony having a stroke is confirmed, and that's why he's no longer part of the governing body. I know that's not how it works, but just pretend with me. Would it be okay for me to hope that Tony is dying from that stroke in Bethel's infirmary? Would I be a good person if I was making fat jokes at his expense, saying how he deserves to die because he's fat and such? Well, of course not. That would make me an awful person. The fact that Tony has been an active part of a damaging cult doesn't give me the right to wish Tony to die from a disease. If it feels good, it's only because of that raw wish for revenge and not from a rational desire for justice. And alcoholism isn't that different. Alcoholism is a terrible disease that unfortunately is quite common among Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses alike. It's a terrible addiction that destroys lives and families. If Tony were an alcoholic, it would destroy him and damage the people he loves. And you may think, well, then justice would have been made because I also lost the people I love. But that's not justice, that's revenge. If Tony is an alcoholic, we as apostates win nothing. All of the CSA cases are still there. The thousands of people who die from lack of blood transfusions still die every year. The religion remains the same, except it no longer has the one governing body member that was so enraging that probably woke up more Jehovah's Witnesses than every apostate combined. His alcoholism wouldn't give us justice, and wishing for it makes us the same as when we as Jehovah's Witnesses wished for destruction for anyone who disagreed with us. Justice is wishing he goes to prison. Justice is hoping all evidence comes to light. Justice is criticizing him for working at the Service Department right now, which is the department in charge of hiding and perpetuating all CSA cases in the religion, and doing our best to shine light on the actual evidence we have of Tony being a despicable human being.
Chickens and Hawks was the second article. It warned about homosexual men who prey on and advocate the right to use boys for sex. Shame on them.
It is one thing to work on a job with others and quite another matter to immerse oneself in an institution of learning. If your hands are not clean because you've been out warning, then they have blood on them and you're going to lose your life. especially these despicable apostates who at one point had dedicated their life to God, and then they joined forces with Satan, the devil, the chief apostate of all time.
And look, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that Tony isn't an alcoholic. The fact that we haven't proved it doesn't mean he's not. I'm just saying that we shouldn't let ourselves get carried by the same gut feelings that are typical in a cult mentality, where everything is fair as long as your enemies lose. I no longer wish that Tony Morris is an alcoholic because that way of thinking doesn't come from ration and justice. It comes from the same kind of mentality that kept us in the cult we just left. Thank you so much to my patrons. I'm about to finish my Patreon shows and videos, so be on the lookout for that and join if you want to vote on the next post. Also, giveaway coming up